Making headlines for this week of June the 12th. Trade traps. Governments attempt to push secret agreements amidst revelations of corporate power grabs. Cabal confab. Bilderberg annual meeting gets underway in Austria. Same, but different. Upping the ante. Greece plays a strategic card that may expose the IMF as being responsible for euro monetary problems. And going to pot. Supreme Court ruling in Canada strikes down limitations on cannabis.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. After a few comparatively quiet weeks, this week seems to be lining up some somewhat major activity on the global scene. We start first with the growing international push by leaders, but also the growing international concern over three trade agreements known as the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or the TTIP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and the very hushed Trade in Services Agreement, or TISA. The secretive nature of these agreements is leading many to speculate that there is much that is being kept hidden about the nature of these agreements. In the U.S., the government there is attempting to implement something known as fast tracking, a process that would facilitate the passage of all trade agreements, and numerous groups are already lining up in protest. This fast track process has been used successfully in the past with various trade agreements, including the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and also the Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA. WikiLeaks has recently exposed some of the information that has been kept from the mainstream public. With a bit more information about the WikiLeaks revelations and the main agenda of these trade agreements, we have this report with Jessica Devereaux of the Real News Network.
The text of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, has become one of the biggest secrets in Washington. This international treaty includes 12 countries and represents more than 40% of the world's GDP. But the text is not available to the public, and what the public does know about the deal comes from 3 leaked chapters sent to WikiLeaks. And now the website is looking to raise $100,000 towards a cash reward to anyone willing to reveal the rest of the 26 chapters of the TPP. Critics of the Obama administration's TPP deal say that the level of secrecy surrounding the deal should make citizens question in whose interest is this deal anyway.
You know, you're putting forth rules that have most of the power to corporations and very little power to people and very few protections for the planet. They're right that people aren't going to like that. So if being transparent forces a different kind of rules, that's the conversation we want to have.
The Real News spoke with Celeste Drake, who is a trade policy specialist with the union AFL-CIO. She's read the entire deal and was a part of a labor advisory committee designed to guide the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR, during negotiations. She was even hesitant to speak too much about the text, because talking about it in detail could end up getting her arrested.
Now, I don't know that they've ever arrested and prosecuted somebody for revealing things that are happening in a trade negotiation, but I don't think that anyone wants to test it either. But we do have very serious issues with the fact that trade agreements are treated in the same way as national security. This really isn't about troop movements. It's not about any kind of military strategy. And frankly, once the U.S. has put its text on the table that says, this is what we want for the intellectual property chapter, or this is what we want from the environment chapter, the need for secrecy is gone. Because in negotiations, you keep it secret from the party that you're negotiating with. You know, and once they have it, there's no more advantage to keeping it secret.
But who else has been able to see this deal? The USTR released names of about 600 trade advisors who have access to the text. 85% of these advisors represent trade associations and corporations. The rest of the groups, like labor, are clearly in the minority. Members of Congress like Connecticut Democrat Rosa DeLauro has come out strongly against the secrecy around the TPP. Congress can only read one section at a time in a secret location in the Capitol's basement, and they are forbidden from taking notes, and only staff with special clearance can see the text. DeLauro says getting information out to the public has been an uphill battle.
And it's taken us a very, very long time to be able to see 3 or 4 chapters of this agreement. We have been unable to do that for months and months and months.
Here to help us dissect these WikiLeaks revelations is Kevin Zeese. Kevin is the co-director of PopularResistance.org and It's Our Economy, an organization that advocates for democratizing the economy. So, Kevin, let's talk about the contents of these leaked documents. First, let's just talk about them as a whole, though. What's the main agenda?
The main agenda is the neoliberal economy, to essentially push deregulation of services and privatization of services. And it deals with both public services like a post office or school system, and private services like the financial systems, the financial services industry, the healthcare. And at least in the United States, healthcare is a private service. Most of the world is a public service, but the United States is a private one. So it's a broad range, professional services, accountants, all of this can be put into this. It's a massive agreement. It covers about 70% of the world's economy, 48 countries, as you mentioned, and for the United States, 80% of our economy is services. And so something like the Postal Service would fall under this. And what it basically is, like, take the Postal Service for example. This agreement would essentially push toward privatization of the Postal Service. The Postal Service right now is a public service. It's the most popular service the government provides to be able to get a letter across the country for a cheap price at a consistent speed. Is like people appreciate it a great deal. It's important to all parts of the country, poor, rural, everyone's treated the same. And so it's a very much beloved, it's in fact the largest employer of African Americans in the country. And under this agreement, this agreement is not like state-supported enterprises. It pushes toward privatization. So it would push the Postal Service toward opening up to competition from private profiteers. So rather than a public good, it becomes a commodity. And the interesting about this agreement is it pushes toward privatization. And once a country allows privatization of its telephone system, its postal service, its utility system, whatever, once it allows privatization, you can't go back to public control. You can't go back to national. It's a one-way street.
It's a one-way street.
One-way street toward privatization.
Okay.
And so this is and for the financial industry, for example, which we know needs regulation after the economic crash. In fact, the regulation put in effect was pretty minimal. We actually need more regulation than we've had. It would make deregulation the reality and not regulation. And again, once you put it in deregulation, you're not going to be allowed to put it in the regulation.
I understand.
It's going to control that. So it's removing the democratic power over services and moving toward a neoliberal, deregulated, privatized, everything's a commodity type economy.
Got it. You read all 17 documents, and so I want to talk about the specifics. And what to you was some of the most egregious parts of this deal?
Well, you know, we all advocate for more transparency. People believe that a government that's transparent is going to be a more effective government. People have a chance to then have their input into the way the government's going, and people know what's going on in their lives and their futures. And this actually, a couple of the documents leaked by WikiLeaks dealt with transparency. The interesting thing about the transparency in this agreement is it's another corporatization only thing. Corporations under this agreement will be required to be told when a government is considering legislation or policy that would affect their business at an early stage. So a corporation is told in advance, so it has a chance to help to write the legislation, help to shape it, make sure it doesn't hurt them, and really have an impact. But there's no transparency of the public. Unions aren't told, environmentalists aren't told, the public's not told. It's, again, a one-way street for corporate power. And that's really what this comes down to. This triad of trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership, and the Services Agreement, all three of these really are pushing toward a whole type of new global corporate governance, where nation-states are weakened, where democracy is weakened, where the people's voice is even made more quiet, and corporations gain greater and greater power. And so the transparency provision, the push toward toward privatization. These are really examples, I think, of where these agreements want to take us. And that's why there's such resistance.
Yeah.
There's massive resistance, even though the services agreement's only been negotiated for the last 2 years, so it's not that well known, and people don't know what services mean. It's a hard agreement to get your head around. There's massive opposition already to it.
An article by David Dayen, appearing on the New Republic website, reported on June the 4th, hints that leaders of numerous countries have long been aware of the threat being posed by the BRICS alliance of countries. Dayen writes that TISA has been negotiated since 2013 between the U.S., the European Union, and 22 other nations, including Canada, Mexico, Australia, Israel, South Korea, Japan, Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, and others scattered across South America and Asia. Overall, 12 of the G20 nations are represented, and negotiations have carefully incorporated practically every advanced economy except for the BRICS coalition of emerging markets. There are dangers within these agreements, and especially within the TISA agreement, as rules are being put into place without the informed democratic consent of the people of the countries whose leaders are acting more in corporate interests than those of their people. The article details the following. The TISA deal would liberalize global trade of services, an expansive definition that encompasses air and maritime transport, package delivery, e-commerce, telecommunications, accountancy, engineering, consulting, healthcare, private education, financial services, and more, covering close to 80% of the U.S. economy, and Dayen says that the agreement would really clear the way for further corporate domination over sovereign countries and their citizens. What is an example of how this agreement could be applied? An article on the dcclothesline.com website on June the 2nd offers such an example, writing the following. If a public hospital is built close to a private one, the private hospital has the right to sue the country for expected losses. This is only one small example. It would effectively end all competition if national services were sold off to private interests. In an interview with Democracy Now!'s Amy Goodman in late May, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange offered this bit of information about the specific document known as the TPP.
It's the largest ever international economic treaty that has ever been negotiated, very considerably larger than NAFTA. It is mostly not about trade. Only 5 of the 29 chapters are about traditional trade. The others are about regulating the Internet, what Internet service providers have to collect information. They have to hand it over to companies under certain circumstances. It's about regulating labor, what labor conditions can be applied, regulating whether you can favor local industry, regulating the hospital healthcare system, privatization of hospitals. Essentially, every aspect of the modern economy, even banking services, are in the TPP. So that is erecting and embedding new, ultra-modern, neoliberal structure in US law and in the laws of the other countries that are participating, and it's putting in a treaty form. And by putting in a treaty form, that means with 14 countries involved, it means it's very, very hard to overturn. So if there's a desire, a democratic desire in the United States to go down a different path, for example, to introduce more public transport, then you can't easily change the TPP treaty because you have to go back and get agreement of the other nations involved. Now, looking at that example, what if the government or a state government decides it wants to build a hospital somewhere and there's a private hospital has been erected nearby? Well, the TPP gives the constructor of the private hospital the right to sue the government over the loss in expected future profits. This is expected future profits. This is not an actual loss that has been sustained, where there's a desire to be compensated. This is a claim about the future. And we know from similar instruments where governments can be sued over free trade treaties that that is used to construct a chilling effect on environmental and health regulation law. For example, Togo, Australia, Uruguay, all being sued by tobacco companies, Philip Morris, the leading one, to prevent them from introducing health warnings on the cigarette packets.
That we have in the United States on our own cigarette packages.
Yes. And it's not even playing field. Let's say you say, okay, well, we're going to make it easier for companies to sue the government. Maybe that's right. Maybe the government is too powerful and companies should have a right to sue the government under various circumstances. But it's only multinationals that get this right. US companies operating purely in the US in relation to investments that happen in the US will not have this right. Whereas large companies that are multinationals that have registrations overseas can structure things such that they're taking investments in the US, and that then gives them the right to sue the government over it. Now, it's not so easy to get up these cases and win them. However, the chilling effect, the concern that there might be such a case is severe. Each one of these cases, on average, governments spend more than $10 million for each case to defend it, even successfully. So if you have, a city council or a state considering legislation, and then there's a threat from one of these multinationals about expected future profits, they know that even if they have the law on their side, even if this TPP is on their side, they can expect to suffer.
These agreements are indeed potentially dangerous to humanity and our planet. And to understand how and why this is even possible for a corporation to have more rights to a country than a national government or a private entity might have, a multinational private entity might have in protecting its resources, requires one to understand better the nature of commercial admiralty law as it has been practiced globally. Over the years, CVN has tried to teach people that the judicial system is merely an elitist system, consisting of a special language that has trapped humans into being corporate entities themselves, while having to unknowingly stand under and submit to commercial rules that have been given the force of law without their consent. The blowback is starting, and not surprisingly, it appears to be more public in Europe than in the US. A bit of a scandal broke out in the European Parliament on June 10th. In an article on the London Independent website, the article reported that UKIP members of the European Parliament, MEPs, sparked a protest that sent the European Parliament into chaos today after a crucial vote and debate on the TTIP agreement was suspended. Stephen Wolfe, UKIP's Immigration and Financial Affairs spokesman, initiated the protest by reading out rules of procedure, stating that if 40 MEPs stood up, they could halt the whole plenary session. Many more than 40 stood up, but the protest was rejected because the session had already allegedly been closed. Meanwhile, MEPs from other parties who are also opposed to the TTIP joined UKIP in standing, shouting, booing, and clapping to show their dissatisfaction with proceedings. The article also quoted Green Party MEP Keith Taylor as saying that the decision to postpone the votes and debate on TTIP stinks of political parties in the European Parliament running scared of the huge public opposition to TTIP. It represents a monumental power grab by corporations, and it must be stopped in its tracks. A statement on a UKIP information webpage explained that what happened was that when the protest was initiated, those in support of the document began to panic and delay the vote, and rang the division bells, a violation of the rules, to bring more members, presumably more supporters, to the chamber to support any potential vote. The global cabal appears to be on its final fearful rampage to force through anything that will give them any hope of maintaining whatever little power they appear to have left. So long as people stay reasonably informed and are willing to share information, while others speak up and stand up, while politicians like Nigel Farage, Sarah Vaughan-Connect, others in Greece, Spain, Iceland, and other countries keep questioning, and while media outlets like Democracy Now! the Real News Network, and others continue their exposure of the stories, the voice of the people will continue to make itself heard as a powerful agent for change in the world. In geopolitical news, we start by observing the flurry of global meetings that appear to be going on at this time. Along with the recent G7 meeting in Bavaria in Germany, there is also taking place the annual Bilderberg meeting, which got underway on June the 11th, this year being held in Austria, about 26 kilometers down the road from the G7. An article by John Stone on the London Independent website on June the 9th reported that the Bilderberg Group has long been the subject of speculation, but what do we really know about the secretive international meetings between top politicians and bosses? Stone notes 4 things that are known about this group and its meetings. He writes, "We know where the meetings are held. This year, the world's elites will travel to the Interalpen Hotel Tirol in the Austrian Alps. We know who attends Bilderberg. The group now releases a list of the attendees. We know what's on the agenda. Prior to meetings, the group releases broad subject areas for debate. This year, all we know is that they'll be discussing artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, chemical weapons threats, current economic issues, European strategy, globalization, Greece, Iran, Middle East, NATO, Russia, terrorism, the United Kingdom, the USA, and U.S. elections." A lot of these subjects' hints are very broad-ranging. United Kingdom, for instance, could be a reference to the Brexit, meaning a British exit from the EU, the recent elections, or possibly both. We know that they take security very seriously. The area around the meetings is put into complete lockdown. There is no need to rely on private security. National governments of host countries cooperate fully and provide police protection. This year's summit starts on Thursday, but already a zone around the Interalpen Hotel Tirol has been established by Austrian police with security checks on vehicles entering and exiting the area. But there is one thing that we will never know, according to Stone, and this is what was said at the gathering. People who attend the events do not, as a rule, talk about the specifics of what was discussed. This includes politicians, whose job it is to represent their constituents. There are no minutes taken of the meetings, and no reports are made of any conclusions reached. No votes are taken and no policies prescribed. Journalists trying to interview participants at meetings have previously been arrested. On June 8th, Charlie Skelton, writing for the London Guardian, reported that no fewer than 3 serving European prime ministers will be attending from the Netherlands, Finland, and Belgium. They will be discussing European strategy with the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and the President of Austria, Heinz Fischer. 2 European finance ministers are on the list, one from the Netherlands and the British, George Osborne. Europe's hottest financial potato, Greece, is on the conference agenda, and it's good to know Benoit Cœuré, a member of the executive board of the European Central Bank, will be there to discuss it in strictest privacy with interested parties such as the heads of Deutsche Bank, Lazard, Banco Santander, and HSBC. The scandal hit HSBC and everyone's favorite vampire squid, Goldman Sachs, are both extremely well represented at this year's conference, Stone writes. HSBC in particular by its chairman, its busy chief legal officer and board member Rona Fairhead, who is also on the board of PepsiCo and chair of the BBC Trust. Other financial luminaries on the list include the vice chair of BlackRock, the CEO of JP Morgan Asset Management, and the president of the Royal Bank of Canada, which is Canada's largest financial institution. As ever, foreign policy formation is a big part of the conference. Terrorism and Iran both make the agenda this year, and participants can expect a high-level briefing from senior U.S. State Department official John R. Allen, the the special presidential envoy for the global coalition to counter ISIL. And it's likely that the subject of Russia will be of interest to the German defense minister and deputy defense minister, both of whom have found the time this week to be in Telfs in Austria, as the head of the Danish intelligence service as well, who will likely have a part to play in the session of cybersecurity. Artificial and arms manufacturer Airbus Corporation is represented, as is low-cost carrier Ryanair. Numerous other huge multinational corporations are represented, also including Google and PayPal. An article in the Daily Mail website from the UK reveals the guest list for those curious to view the names. The countries with the greatest representations include the US with 34 people, the UK with 12, France with 10, Austria saw 9 attendees, Germany had 8, the Netherlands 7, and Turkey with 6. Strangely, however, something that usually happens before the Bilderberg Summit that did not happen this year, or it has just not yet been discovered, is the meeting of the Trilateral Commission. Sources in the past have speculated that the Trilateral Commission's annual meeting has helped to set the agenda that is followed at Bilderberg. This does not appear to be the case this year, as it does not appear on the website for the Trilateral Commission. Perhaps, over the coming weeks, someone may be fortunate enough to come into contact with a secret whistleblower who may be prepared to reveal what took place at this year's secretive confab of politicians, bureaucrats, royalty, corporate leaders, and yes, even criminals. Coming back to Germany, and it seems that there is at least one politician in Germany who appears to be standing up with courage and conviction about the farce that is playing out in Europe, the Middle East, Greece, and Ukraine. This woman appears to be a female version of Nigel Farage. Her name is Sarah Wagenknecht, and she is the representative for one of the more populous regions in Germany, including cities such as Düsseldorf, Cologne, Bonn, and a few others. She seems to be fully aware of the global cabal and its negative impact on geopolitics, especially as it relates to Germany and Europe. In an article appearing on the Fort Russ blog page on June the 6th, there is an English translation by Tom Winter of a speech that Wagenknecht apparently delivered to the Left Party, to which she belongs. Here are a few selected excerpts from her address, and she starts by commenting on the G7 meeting. Dear colleagues, in politics, it's plain truth. The shabbier the contents, the more emphatic the justifications. There will be a meeting tomorrow in Elmau of not only the self-proclaimed government of the world that nobody needs, but, if we are to believe Mrs. Merkel, a meeting behind high fences of something much, much more noble, namely a community of values. A community of values in which only those professing the values of international law are allowed. I do not know if the highly over-esteemed Chancellor noticed that if you would take this principle seriously, the Japanese Prime Minister would be damn lonely in Elmau because, except for Japan, there is not a single country in the G7 that has not, in recent years, gotten itself involved in international law-breaking war. It is a sad reality, but it is a reality. Whoever takes this NATO strategy for a value-based policy and who still believes Germany's responsibility in the world depends on putting this kind of policy up front needs their head examined. Dear colleagues, war is the greatest human rights crime, and therefore there can be no less serious wars, and there must be a party in the Bundestag and stay there that still has the courage to utter this truth. And it does not matter whether it's the SPD or the Greens, like it or not. They tell us that we will need the NSA's high-tech sniffers to protect us against terrorist attacks. What kind of nonsense is that? If you don't want terrorists in your country, stop terrorizing abroad. And it's a fact and a truth. U.S. drones have wiped out countless innocent families from Yemen to Afghanistan. And these drones would not fly if Germany, via Ramstein, a military base, were not providing the necessary base. An end to this cooperation, and this means, in consequence, an exit from the military structures of NATO. An end to this cooperation would be the most important requirement for protection from terrorist attacks, and far better than the NSA illegally supplying us with all our private data. Allegedly, the days in El Mao are only for the really quite flawless Democrats. Even that is also cited as a reason why Putin is not welcome there. And what a hypocrisy. How can people call themselves democratic and at the same time be negotiating on a free trade agreement like CETA and also the TTIP, whose declared aim is to take away the decision-making authority from democratically elected governments and parliaments, to install corporations over government, and basically make all future elections superfluous, because then you cannot let any country propose and adopt laws that would bring the big profiteers to heel. I have to say once, those involved in such an agreement, who support such agreements, have to stop calling themselves democratic. These are anti-democrats, and it is anti-democratic agreements that are being negotiated there. Wagenknecht goes straight to the heart of the Greek crisis also, sending a very direct message to Bavarian Finance Minister Markus Söder, who has been demanding Greece repay Germany's money to them. Wagenknecht states, Mr. Söder is always in grand form, showing up on the talk shows as he demands of the Greeks, I want our money back. Well, one can only say, Mr. Söder, yes, please, have them get their money back. But, if you please, from the ones that got it. And that's not the Greek nurse, and that is not the Greek pensioners, but it's the banks and the Greek elite. There lies the money that Greeks need. And that is the way it is in all of Europe. It lies with the banks, the conglomerates, and the upper class, she says. There lies the money needed for a socially just policy. For CVN listeners who speak German, a link will be provided to a speech delivered by Wagenknecht to the German Bundestag, the parliament, sometime around mid-March. I am told that in this speech she apparently refers to Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, as a bankster that loots Europe, among other things. She also calls for sanctions against the U.S. and that the U.S. must be punished for its international meddling and influence of global affairs. CVN is attempting to reach out to Wagenknecht in the hopes that perhaps she may be open for an interview if she feels comfortable enough to speak in English. With the German people now speaking up, it seems that the politicians are beginning to listen. And even though my knowledge of German is not very good, there does appear to be a refreshing energy coming from within the German parliament that recognizes what is going on around the world. Across the pond to Canada now, and CVN reported last week that Canadian Prime Minister Harper was traveling to Europe to attend the G7 meeting in Germany and also would visit the Pope on his final stop of the trip. He also made comments about Russia and its future with the G7. An RT article on June 5th quoted Harper as saying that, I don't think Russia under Vladimir Putin belongs in the G7, period. Canada would very, very strongly oppose Putin ever sitting around that table again. It would require consensus to bring Russia back, and that consensus will just not happen. The article reported Harper as saying that Russia is hard to get on with. I note the sad and tragic irony in that statement, given Canada's own treatment of its Indigenous brothers and sisters. CVN also noted last week the report released by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, noting that Canada's treatment, or rather the specific treatment of the government and its agents towards the Indigenous tribes of Canada, as being cultural genocide. An Ottawa Citizen article on June the 2nd by Jason Fakit had reported that the Vatican's embassy in Ottawa was very aware of the Commission's findings and that a demand was being made for the Pope to come in person within a year to apologize for the Catholic Church's participation in the harm of Indigenous children through residential schools. The article notes that the Catholic Archbishop of Ottawa, who apologized earlier this week for the abuse at residential schools that were run by the Roman Catholic Church, said calls for the Pope to deliver an apology in Canada is quite an extraordinary thing to demand. The only leader of the three political parties who seems willing to step up to the plate in addressing the issue is NDP leader Tom Mulcair, a man who months ago appeared to be trailing in the polls leading up to the election this year, but who is making a comeback and may have a realistic shot of becoming the first New Democratic Prime Minister in Canada in October. Mulcair was quoted as saying that the first step in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report on residential schools is to implement a nation-to-nation approach with First Nations, making education the #1 priority. Rex Murphy, a commentator for the CBC in Canada, shared some comments about the Commission's report and the impact that this document must play in the future direction of Canada.
Kim Campbell once said that elections were not the best time to deal with serious issues. How wrong she was. For really serious ones, they might be the only time. The report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission deals with this country's most pressing and sensitive moral challenge. Its findings add detail and testimony to a great, sad narrative of this country. It recharges most Canadians' sense that beyond sympathy and apology, facing up to the necessity of repairing relations between Aboriginal peoples and all other Canadians. Sympathy and apology are good and necessary, but they've never been sufficient. Nor is the sense of near collective shame that Canadians, I believe, genuinely feel, despite its moral merit, amount to an effective response. That response, like the sympathy and apologies, has to find a practical outlet, one that relates to actual situations, measurable improvement, and an end to the barren cycle of bursts of compassion followed by long intervals of evasive neglect. That is why, in all matters beyond the substance of this report, the timing of it is significant, and why on this most central of issues in Canadian politics, the timing adds to its power. For this is a moment when Kim Campbell's comment is most off the mark. We've had a lot of talk about the leaders' debates, who hosts them, where they're going to be held, all the usual stuff, all about process and political advantage. With the release of this report, we now have a cardinal issue on which to hold those debates. More, we have a cardinal issue on which each of the parties and their leaders have at least 6 months to give serious and considered thought on what they would actually do, beyond sentiment and lip service, to alter the patterns that have left Aboriginal peoples on the edge of mainstream society, caught in patterns of dysfunction and wide poverty, and stranded from what should be the rights and privileges of every citizen in modern Canada. We can leave all the trivia of politics behind on this issue and ask, particularly of our leaders, what, in specifics and substance, in results that can and will be measured, they propose to do to effect the deep repair of an historical, generational, and grievous wrong. This should not be an election issue, but the election issue. For unless the report receives the full political engagement that an election represents, unless each party offers to the voters its serious and detailed response to it, then this report, for all the attention and honorable response of the last few days, will be just one more bright flare sent up to an empty sky, something that offered a showy moral gratification for a few days, and then, like so many other moments before, was allowed to pass without the action and commitments that a true seriousness would demand. For The National, I'm Rex Murphy.
Calls were made for the Aboriginal Affairs Minister to resign because he neither stood up nor applauded the statements made by the Commissioner in releasing the report. In his absence from this presentation, Harper was on his way to Europe, where there were other things on the global scene that were more important for him during his final international trip before the upcoming election. In a separate but related story, for a man seeking to impose his imagined political and economic might in the world, Harper has very little, if any, global power despite what his ego might believe. He keeps trying, however. Mike Blanchfield of the Canadian Press wrote of Canada's and Japan's blocking of attempts to set a specific statement on binding greenhouse gas reduction targets. Almost single-handedly, he is using his influence to help slow down the movement of the world towards a greener way of living, to support his connections to big oil in Canada. Josh Wingrove and John Follane, writing for Bloomberg on June the 11th, covered Harper's visit to Italy as part of his trip, writing that Canadian Prime Minister Harper held a brief meeting with Pope Francis on Thursday before a visit with Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, concluding a week-long European tour. Harper spent much of his tour criticizing Russian President Vladimir Putin, who had met both Renzi and the Pope just one day earlier. What is interesting to note, and what must be a point of concern in some circles, is that Harper's meeting with the Pope was only 10 minutes in length, compared to 50 minutes given to Putin the day before. Seriously, 10 minutes? One almost has to wonder why it is worth spending all these tax dollars to fly to an international location with staff and security when all Harper had to do was have an online video conference. The article reported that Harper and Pope Francis discussed international political issues, including Europe and the Middle East, as well as terrorism and environmental issues, according to a Vatican statement. The good relations and positive spirit of cooperation and dialogue between Canada and the Vatican were discussed as well, the Vatican said. Yes, in 10 minutes that could very easily have been a video conference call. The environment, again, another example of hypocrisy given Canada's environmental choices at the G7. What Harper did not do, however, according to the article by Blanchfield in the Toronto Star on June the 11th, was seek an apology from the Vatican for its alleged role in the mistreatment of Indigenous children at Canadian residential schools. He only briefly mentioned the report's finding while focusing on the issues above. There is, however, one very big and very positive piece of news coming out of Canada this week, and this will be coming up shortly. In financial news now, last week I reported and hinted that we may not find out right away exactly why Greece and the EU banking cabal keep kicking the can down the road, and why Greece does not jump at the chance to join BRICS. This week, some possible answers may be starting to come to light. Ambrose Evans Pritchard, writing for the London Telegraph, reported on June the 5th that the International Monetary Fund is in serious trouble. Events have reached a point in Greece where the fund's own credibility and long-term survival are at stake. What Pritchard is getting at is that Greece is not withholding a €300 million payment to the IMF because they have run out of money, although they soon will do that. There appears to be another strategy at work, and this may be the strategy that I have been speculating on, that Greece is using to slow the chess game down with the global banking cabal. Pritchard Evans writes, 5 key players in the radical left Syriza movement, meeting in the Maximus Mansion in Athens on June the 4th, took an ice-cold, calculated, and carefully considered decision not to pay. They knew exactly what they were doing. The IMF's Christine Lagarde was caught badly off guard. Staff officials in Washington were stunned. On one level, the bundling of €1.6 billion of payments due to the IMF in June is just a technical shuffle albeit invoking a procedure last used by Zambia for different reasons in the 1980s. In reality, it is a warning shot and a dangerous escalation for all parties. Greece is pushing the IMF to a point where, if a default is announced, then it is the IMF that will have to explain to 188 members why it lost its members' money so carelessly. Pritchard Evans continues, the Greeks accuse the IMF of colluding in an EMU-imposed austerity regime that breaches the fund's own rules and is in open contradiction with 5 years of analysis by its own excellent research department and chief economist Olivier Blanchard. Ashoka Modi, former chief of the IMF's bailout in Ireland, was quoted as saying that everything that we have learned over the last 5 years is that it is stunningly bad economics to enforce austerity on a country when it is in a deflationary cycle. Trauma patients have to heal their wounds before they can train for the 10K run. Syriza should recruit the IMF's research department to be their spokesman because they are saying almost exactly the same thing as Syriza on the economics of this. The entire strategy of the creditors is wrong, and the longer this goes on, the more it is going to cost them. What is arguably the main reason for the trouble the IMF is now in stems from the time when Dominique Strauss-Kahn was the IMF chief, and he used the institution to prop up EU currencies instead of keeping the institution in its proper place of saving countries. The euro crisis came in 2010, and the problems only mounted from there. In 2010, the Eurozone was out of control. The article writes that there were no backstop defenses due to the criminal negligence of Europe's leaders and banking regulators, and fears of a Euro-Lehman type of banking collapse were all too real. Yet, leaked minutes from the IMF board meetings showed that all the emerging market members, and Switzerland, opposed the terms of the first loan package for Greece. They protested that it was intended to save the euro, not Greece. Leadership failed, the West disgraced itself, and no wonder Asia is now going its own way with a rival set of financial banking bodies. Greece's firebrand government is bringing matters to a head for an institution already in trouble. Pritchard Evans seems to suggest that IMF chief Christine Lagarde must now take the bull by the horns. She must make it clear to IMF members and creditors that Greece needs sweeping debt relief as a matter of economic science, whatever the morality, and that the refusal of the creditors to face up to this elemental fact is now the chief impediment to a solution. And she should tell them that the IMF will no longer play any part in their deceitful charade. A question that one may be inclined to ask, then, is whether the choice not to do this is the one that collapses the Western system by forcing Greece to go into the BRICS alliance, or will the choice to give sweeping debt relief be one of the steps towards a global debt jubilee that may precede a global currency reset? In general news this week, arguably the biggest story is coming out of Canada. I have to admit, this one caught me most pleasantly by surprise and is giving me a bit of hope that somewhere within the corridors of power of Canada, there are forces at work to help change things for the better in Canada. This week, in yet another blow to the government of Stephen Harper, the Supreme Court of Canada has upheld a ruling allowing the use of cannabis in all forms. An article appearing on June the 11th on the CBC website by Trin Teresa Doe reports that medical marijuana patients will now be able to consume marijuana and not just smoke it, as well as use other extracts and derivatives, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled on June the 11th. What is also pleasantly surprising is that the court's ruling was unanimous. Doe continues, writing that restricting medical access to marijuana to a dried form has now been declared null and void. Sections 4 and 5 of the Controlled Drug and Substances Act, which prohibits possession of non-dried forms of cannabis, will no longer be in effect. The decision upholds earlier rulings by lower courts in British Columbia that said they went against a person's right to consume medical marijuana in the form they choose. This 2015 ruling stems from a case in British Columbia in 2009 when a baker working for the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club was charged by police for having possession of cookies and jars of liquid, including cannabis-infused massage oils and lip balms that were intended as medical marijuana products for its members. Doe noted in the article that the baker, Owen Smith, was acquitted by a British Columbia judge who gave the federal government a year to change the laws around extracts. A BC appeals court also ruled in Smith's favor, leading the federal government to take the case to Canada's top court. The appeal court had also suspended its declaration for a year to give Parliament time to rewrite the law. The Supreme Court has now deleted that suspension, saying otherwise it would leave patients without lawful medical treatment and the law and law enforcement in limbo. It seems odd that the government would allow marijuana to be smoked by medical patients and not consumed in other ways. If I was to speculate on this, my thoughts would be that the government was hoping to eventually discredit medical marijuana because people would do something dangerous while being high. As many know, the THC compound is activated, producing the hallucinogenic effect when it is heated. In other forms, this effect is not as pronounced, and there is growing information to support the health benefits, including for cancer treatments by using non-heated cannabis products. The ruling appears to strike down government efforts to maintain some degree of criminality tied to marijuana for the purposes of commercial profit within the system of Admiralty law. It could also be a very big blow to Big Pharma and Big Medicine, both of whom have profited extensively from illness and the sale of dangerous pharmaceuticals. Now, so far in this article, I have mentioned only medical marijuana, but it seems that the ruling actually goes beyond medical marijuana and opens it up to cannabis in general, and it appears the media is only saying medical marijuana, perhaps to avoid causing a rush towards going to pot, so to speak. CVN spoke with Jason Bowman, who has been a regular contributor to the newscast on issues relating to our Indigenous brothers and sisters in Canada. Recently, he has been working with an organization to promote cannabis awareness in a city in southern Ontario, in a province in central Canada. Bowman offered the following comments regarding the ruling on June the 11th.
Essentially, what the ruling means to us, as you've indicated, Jeffrey, is that cannabis in all of its forms is now legal for patients to consume anywhere within Canada. So you noted in the article a few examples of products which are now legally available to patients within Canada, such as baked goods. One of the products, however, which has generated a lot of interest and which is now legal and accessible to those who need it, pursuant to this Supreme Court of Canada ruling, is what's known as the Rick Simpson oil, or RSO. You can get a lot more information on this by going to phoenixtears.ca or Googling the Rick Simpson oil. There are numerous health benefits, and most notably, I can tell you, really what's probably the most fascinating aspect of this whole medical cannabis issue would be the apoptic effects that CB1 and CB2 receptors, once activated, have on cancer cells. What that means is that when you activate CB1 and CB2 receptor cells with cannabinoids, you end up having apoptosis occur if there are cancer cells anywhere in your body. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, so your cancer kills itself when you activate these receptors. The article that you referenced used the term, quote, medical marijuana, and this may cause some confusion with the interpretation of understanding. What this means is that the regime is still not understanding the difference between the made-up term marijuana and cannabis, which is the essentially natural plant which produces the cannabinoids, particularly in the female flowers, that we find so therapeutic. The confusion by calling this plant marijuana, spelt with either a J or an H, depending on whether you're American or British, is misleading because marijuana doesn't appear in any botanical book that I've ever seen. The fact that this ruling yesterday was unanimous and the fact that it represents yet another loss for this absolutely depraved regime suggests to me that the judges in this land are absolutely at odds with this increasingly runaway and increasingly fascist regime we see in Ottawa, the outgoing regime, hopefully. As far as potential consequences to what we refer to as big pharma, big medicine, and the big money backers behind all these ridiculous and asinine prohibitions and nonsensical regulations prohibiting sick and dying patients from accessing safe, effective, natural medicine, these patients and victims of the frauds and the poisoning that's been going on by organized medicine and the organized drug dealers who wear white coats is going to come to an end because at some point these people are going to be held to account for their actions. The sections of the CDSA that were struck down yesterday are sections 4 and 5 as they pertain to medical cannabis. So section 6 deals with importing, section 7 deals with actual growing of cannabis, and the accused, Mr. Smith, wasn't charged with growing, he was charged with possession for the purpose of trafficking. So what was stricken down were the possession and trafficking parts of the medical cannabis prohibition, but not the growing, sadly, which is why we still have more work to do. There's no doubt that people will attempt to downplay the ruling. I've seen it already. I've seen the health minister spinning it into her own web of her own style of deceit and ignorance. There are those who claim that we have to think about the children. What about the children? What about the extra crime? What about public safety? We just step away from this nonsense and look at the facts. State after state with legal recreational cannabis are seeing constantly consistent results. I can't see one example anywhere out of any of the data that I've looked at where we've seen any increase in crime whatsoever in jurisdictions which have gone ahead and allowed people to access cannabis. Jeffrey, the potential economic benefit to individuals, communities, regions, and indeed nationally speaking is phenomenal. There are so many uses for cannabis, from its incredibly safe therapeutic properties found in the female flowers to obviously biofuels, hempcrete, building materials, paper, food, fiber, oil, medicine, you name it. It's the brightest burning lamp oil that people know of, and you can drink it. It's a 100% protein source for humans. Hemp and cannabis, which is the same plant, really is going to, in humanity's return to this plant that really helps people really become independent. Because when you cultivate cannabis and you use cannabis in all of its forms, you don't need to be going to white coats for prescriptions. You don't need aspirin. You don't need sleeping pills. You don't need antidepressants, anti-seizure, insulin. We find that people who are using natural cannabinoid extracts actually have very little that they need to go to their doctor for other than to renew their permit to access the cannabis.
Bowman is currently serving with the Niagara Cannabis Club in St. Catharines, Ontario, a club founded by Kelly Cush. There are almost 1,800 members online, and the club serves in numerous capacities to provide affordable and quality cannabis to those experiencing health challenges. As Bowman notes, there are still some legal challenges ahead due to the fact that there are still laws restricting the growing of cannabis. What it represents, however, is that people will finally have access to legal and quality cannabis to facilitate their healing. Links to Rick Simpson's Phoenix Tears website and to the Niagara Cannabis Club will appear in the show summary. Over to Tech News for the week, and we start with a look at what appears to already be the next evolution in the 3D printing world. As has been covered numerous times already on CVN, 3D printing is rapidly establishing itself as a technology that has the potential to eliminate many stores because of the ability to print what is needed at home, but also to improve most, if not all, aspects of the way humans currently live. It has the potential to reshape economics and also slow down the economic control of the global cabal. Over the last couple of months, the next generation of this replicating technology has begun coming online in the mainstream public. This latest process involves the use of liquids known as polymer resin. According to a report published on the Science Mag website last March, a research partnership of 12 people named in the report produced the abstract describing the process. They write that additive manufacturing processes such as 3D printing use time-consuming, stepwise, layer-by-layer approaches to object fabrication. We demonstrate the continuous generation of monolithic polymeric parts up to tens of centimeters in size with feature resolution below 100 micrometers. Continuous liquid interface production is achieved with an oxygen-permeable window below the ultraviolet image projection plane, which creates a dead zone. In other words, a persistent liquid interface, where photopolymerization is inhibited between the window and the polymerizing part. We delineate critical control parameters and show that complex solid parts can be drawn out of the resin at rates of hundreds of millimeters per hour. These print speeds allow parts to be produced in minutes instead of hours. This short audio clip describes the process and may put it into a slightly more understandable form as opposed to the scientific description previously.
By balancing liquid, light, and air, 3D printing technology is getting smoother and faster. The new process is called Continuous Liquid Interface Production, or CLIP for short. Other printers put down one solid layer at a time in a lengthy mechanical process. CLIP works by projecting a series of ultraviolet images through a special window located below a bath of liquid resin. The light causes the resin to harden into the projected shape, like a series of solidifying movie frames. As the printed object is lifted out of the bath, fresh resin is pulled toward the window. 3D printing is now a continuous process, and the speed is mainly limited by how fast the resin cures and its viscosity.
It might seem that the rate of the 3D printing technology is taking off. It could be less than a year before we begin seeing full replicator technology, such as the devices that have been used on Star Trek TV series and in the movies. Finally, in health news for the week, we start by looking at one way in which the people are beginning to win the battle against the big multinationals merely by using the power within their personal purchasing choices. An article by Christina Sarich was posted on the Natural Society website on June the 6th, and she is reporting that consumers are leaving toxic food makers' products behind on grocery store shelves faster than you can say organic. Big Food lost $4 billion in sales last year alone due to their inability to answer market demand for non-GM organic food that doesn't contain high fructose corn syrup, gluten, antibiotics, growth hormones, MSG, and other toxic additives. Meanwhile, the organic food is absolutely exploding. Sarich goes on to add that Big Food has a multi-billion-dollar problem on their hands, and this is why they have spent so much money trying to defeat GMO labeling bills in multiple states. But they can't get around the awakening public's demand for better food. It is staring them right in the face. Some companies are aware of the shifting, and Campbell's CEO was quoted in the article as saying that we understand that increasing numbers of consumers are seeking authentic, genuine food experiences, and we know that they are skeptical of the ability of large, long-established food companies to deliver them. Sarich writes that these CEOs pretend not to know why consumers don't trust them. Could it be that they have fought against public requests to deliver real, non-genetically modified or toxic additive-laden food for years to no avail? Could it be because they have spent millions trying to keep the public from even knowing what is in their food? The public is starting to win the battle merely by making better choices, but also by sharing relevant news to their family and friends so they can see, finally, that something is beginning to happen and that they can now also jump onto the bandwagon of change. The toxic food, however, that has been sold to us in supermarkets has had its impact on the vast majority of humans, however. The food toxins that have been ingested have supported big pharma and big medicine for decades, as they have profited on the illness of people without focusing on maintaining the natural state of the body, which is a state of health. Parasites within the body that feed on the numerous toxins are contributors to numerous physical conditions being experienced by people worldwide. An article appearing on the Live Love Fruit website by Carly Fraser last October reports that these are some common symptoms of parasites, which thankfully are also symptoms of other deficiencies and illnesses, but that could also be a direct result of parasites festering in the body. Constipation, diarrhea, gas and bloating, irritable bowel syndrome, joint and muscle aches, anemia, cravings for junk food, not wanting to eat vegetables, allergies, skin conditions such as irritation, itching at the nose, ears, eyes, and anus, rashes, hives and eczema, tumors, nervousness, anxiety, sleep disorders, teeth grinding, chronic fatigue, fuzzy thinking, headaches, runny nose, loss of appetite, bad taste in the mouth, acne, fever, dark areas under the eyes, and yeast candida infections. Fraser notes 10 ways to get rid of parasites in your body, and they are as follows. She suggests, number 1, water or juice fasting for an extended period of time, and Fraser promises that you'll feel like a new person. Number 2, avoid all raw or poorly cooked meats, fish, seafood, and shellfish. They are usually full of parasitic eggs and cysts. 3, try going vegan or even raw vegan for a week or two and watch your health skyrocket. Enhancing overall vitality of the body is required to rid the body of parasites. Parasites live on low frequencies and thrive in sick bodies. Number 4, consider a liver detox because parasites cannot stand bile. It is irritating and even lethal for parasites. A liver cleanse is almost necessary. For a majority of people, the liver doesn't function as optimally as it is supposed to. This will result in reduced bile flow and a higher chance for parasite infestation. Number 5, eat more raw garlic and onions. Raw garlic and onions provide the body with sulfur containing amino acids which are highly antiparasitic. Number 6, take oregano oil as a supplement or as drops in lemon water 2 to 3 times a day. Number 7, increase your intake of a quality probiotic to help eliminate intestinal worms. Number 8, incorporate antiparasitic herbs into your diet like black walnut, pau d'artichaut, thyme, burdock, wormwood, and cloves is probably one of the most effective ways to help flush parasites out. Number 9, Fraser writes, get rid of food allergens that parasites love, such as soy, wheat, eggs, and dairy products. Parasites will love you if you continue eating these foods. These foods also trigger a host of different illnesses and disorders, like hormone imbalance, multiple sclerosis, irritable bowel syndrome, cancer, mucus production, and so much more. And finally, number 10, Fraser advises eat raw pumpkin seeds. She adds that this is probably one of the easiest ways to help deworm your body. Raw pumpkin seeds, when soaked and sprouted for a couple of days, dramatically helps eliminate a variety of worms. In fact, North Americans Native Americans, rather, are known to have chewed pumpkin seeds as an aid in deworming their body. Our choices are winning, and not only against the multinationals, but also against the parasites that are keeping each of us from attaining our full, abundant health and ultimate power. In this week's FYI segment, Alice Coppers returns, offering a bit more information on oxytocin, while also going into some of the side effects of the drug treatment programs, and opens the door to investigating the cover-up by the CIA and an organization called the Tavistock Institute in exploring ways to control the population on a mass scale.
Last week, we talked briefly about oxytocin and how oxytocin is the bonding hormone of mammals. It has been built into us so that we don't abandon our newborns and we procreate, fall in love and bond and stay with our mate. However, oxytocin can be reduced or eliminated, especially in males. It's far easier to do in males than in females, but can be reduced by the use of a high sugar diet or BPA, which is a polymer in plastics, and fear. Fear is the chemical in our brain called fight or flight, which lasts about 90 minutes chemically when we trigger it on. One of the things, too, about fear is that it can be easily triggered by movies or by false flags, as I call them, things that scare you that aren't really there. When the brain is starving or in a depressive state, fear is often the theme of everything around the person. Depression is a word that's used in our society very lucratively, but was never heard of 50 years ago. We called it melancholy or sadness, but we never said depression. I don't think we had a word for depression until the 1960s. Depression can be increased easily in the body hormonally. Remember, we talked about the amount of body fat that a person has available increases the way that hormones can stick and reverse, so that a person who's sedentary and sits on the couch watching television and eating junk food would be gaining weight, but they would also be gaining more toxins in their body, and their hormones begin to reverse, so that males' testosterone turns to estrogen in the fat. So there has to be fat present to turn the estrogen into testosterone in females or testosterone into estrogen in males, because the fat is necessary for this process to happen. When you don't have a lot of body fat, then your hormones can't reverse. That's important because when a female's hormones reverse, when my estrogen turns to testosterone because of my sedentary lifestyle, I begin to get facial hair, I begin to lose my upper hair on the top of my head. I also begin to have sagging breasts, and things that males have, like hair on my chest, begin to appear. And those are not desirable. So people need to be aware of this. Also, depression is increased with lack of movement or exercise. Because we are a long-legged species, we need to be moving to get our endorphins to increase, because our brain makes endorphins when we sweat. So when you get out there and exercise, whatever you choose to do is irrelevant as long as you sweat. So you're making endorphins. And remember, you can get a little runner's high just from walking up a hill. If you get lack of exercise, you increase the toxins in the body because you're not sweating. And it makes sense. You're not taking as much water, you're not sweating out the toxins, they're accumulating in the fat that you're accumulating now. So also it increases aging. That's a summary of the whole pH thing, is the more you stay on a low end of pH and stay acidic in your body, the quicker you age. And the more that you stay alkaline in the high end of the alkalinity scale, the less you age and the longer you live. And there are even studies in the Asian countries that state people can live to be 140. Another issue is antidepressants that are given when a person goes to a mental health official for depression don't always work. I think I need to inject a little bit of my background at this point so that I can continue on about why I'm so against antidepressants. And these are my personal views about antidepressants that I'm going to state. My background is 23 years in the Department of Corrections, and it was mental health. Now they're both combined to, I believe, the Department of Rehab or something like that. But it was 23 years at Atascadero State Hospital, Pelican Bay, Corcoran State Prison, and Vacaville Men's Colony. I always wondered why everybody in there was so violent and so fearful. Prison is scary, but sometimes it was even more than that. Scared to get out, and then they would jeopardize their release and do something stupid and get another charge, so they can't get out. That was part of it. But one of the things that I had real hard time absorbing was the DSM, the book that every mental health doctor or social worker or psychologist uses to diagnose and treat a mental illness, because it seemed like it was only for insurance companies to code reimbursement. It didn't seem like it had any real direct effect on treatment or on the person's mental health issues. Diagnosis was often very negative because it held a long-time stigma. Even after the person quit the medication and the problem was gone, they would still be having a hard time getting a driver's license or getting a government job or getting a rental like an apartment, because oftentimes there's a question that says, are you in mental health treatment? Also, because of computers, all of that gets linked together, and people really can't lie about if they're in treatment or not anymore. That being said, when there's severe limits on living arrangements and side effects and mental health stigma, why would anybody try to get that kind of help? That sounds worse than the depression that you originally had, to me. But anyways, the DSM, when I would question the difference between major depression and regular depression, and it was always, there was no research really to back what the different opinions were. Very few people got better, and very, very few people were successful out in the community, and a lot in prison, 80 or 85% in California, come back within 2 years. Obviously, this is not very successful. And then the DSM, the idea that they have no treatment for labels such as psychopaths or multiple personalities, that idea is also, what if you get that label and they tell you there's absolutely no treatment? How do you hang on to hope that way? You have to wonder what this book was really about and what was really behind it. I found out what was really behind it. Back in 1953, the CIA was doing experiments, and they had involvement with Freud and Bernays, and brought these deep ties from the East India Company in Europe over here to America, to the Malibu area, and called it the Tavistock Institute. The CIA was looking to use studies of human patterns to enslave populations.
Coppers put together a longer report than normal this week, going into a little bit more of the CIA and the Tavistock research that was taking place, but I was unable to use the full information this week. I apologize to Alice, although perhaps the exploration into these programs can be explored next week. As an announcement for this week, I just want to let listeners know that the newscast may be a bit late next week. I have been invited to attend a dinner party with the family I am currently staying with in celebration of the Swedish midsummer tradition, also known as the summer solstice, and this will take place on Friday. Depending upon the length of the festivities, I may or may not be able to have the newscast ready at its normal time. However, I will have it up and available as soon as possible, if not at its usual air time. So, next week, the newscast may be a little bit late. And in this week's final words, I observe with compassion, and perhaps even with a little bit of sadness, the arrogance, even more like gentle arrogance, that is creeping in with some members of the more popular light worker community. There are those among us who have spent decades, and there are many who have spent years, and perhaps even more who have spent the last year, waking up to what has been going on in the world, or at least that which is being claimed to be going on in the world. Ironic, is it not, that so many of us are defending our so-called awakened perspectives with the same tenacity as those who may defend their respective religious or faith-based beliefs from a more 3D perspective. As has been the case with religions and faiths worldwide, and with many other topics also, there are those who defend something as though they are somehow in possession of all the knowledge to adequately defend a belief. There are those who attack something as though they are somehow in possession of all the knowledge to adequately declare another person or thing as wrong, bad, or evil. For those who have seen the movie Inception, they may grasp the concept of the dream within a dream, within a dream, within a dream. And all of this, on some level, may take place within the space of mere seconds in linear time. The mere thought of that is enough to possibly blow brain stems, even of those who consider themselves to be awakened. I have often used the term awakened because it seems to be an appropriate term relative to the space of consciousness I happen to be in, relative to the space of consciousness others may be in the same moment of now. The fact of the matter is, however, and I have written and spoken of this concept called the bigger picture. I may only be awake to the particular level, if I could call it that, within the dream of duality illusion. It may not even be duality. Perhaps it is something even more. Until one has fully experienced something, it is not always able to adequately define it, let alone explain it. There are 2 or 3 key points, however, that I'm trying to get at that I hope will be worthy of reflection for at least a few people this week. There is no one among us who can claim to be in possession of the whole picture at this time. With all the information, disinformation, misinformation, and more information coming out, there are people moving from one space of awareness based on what one accepts as truth in any moment, perhaps to the next space, or perhaps even back to a previous space, depending upon the presence of fear or an inability to move forward in one's journey. The movie Inception, made in 2010, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Ellen Page, is described as follows: a thief who steals corporate secrets through the use of dream-sharing technology is given the inverse task of planting an idea into the mind of a CEO. The CEO is aware of the power of the technology. Therefore, in order to fool even the CEO, 7 layers of dream states were necessary to achieve the desired effect. DiCaprio's character says in the movie, "Dreams feel real while we are in them. It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange." The global cabal has, I believe, used a similar strategy on a more 3D level to fool humanity by giving humans false illusions of security through parliamentary governance or police departments or through the legal system. An illusion of security was set up through a criminally fraudulent system of banking that created money out of thin air. Humans have naively trusted in these institutions and more. However, some people learn about the political lies. Others learn about the financial lies. Others still about the lies of the legal, judicial, and law enforcement institutions, and so on. Each individual awakens within on one level of the dream state that is relevant to each individual in that moment. Within each individual's journey through dream states, there is the collective dream state or illusion that has been part of the human journey. If you are feeling mind blown at this point, that's perfectly okay. Don't try to take all this in if it feels too much for you. I may not even be on base at all with what I'm offering this week. We are peeling off layer after layer after layer of the onion skin. Some have peeled off more layers than others, and there are those who wisely and humbly understand that they may still not know anything, while others naively and aggressively try to push what they have discovered as the answer, when it really has only been an answer relative to the individual in his or her journey in that moment. I, and thousands upon thousands like me, are working to expose the global cabal and help facilitate this thing we can only describe as a new human and planetary consciousness, what others describe as a golden age of consciousness. Is this the final answer and the final destination for humanity? There are many who will vehemently defend this as the final destination, just as there are those who vehemently defend that their religion or faith is the absolute truth and destination to which all humans are to follow. There are those who may look to me and others like me for guidance to what is truth or what is the final answer to all that we are experiencing at this time. Some will try to tell you they have that answer. It is my honest and humble feeling that I do not have the right to tell you that. I honestly have no idea just yet whether this new consciousness that I believe we are awakening to is the final answer for all of humanity, or whether it is merely the next level of the dream or the onion that we have to peel away. I neither honor myself nor do I honor you, the listener, by claiming that there is any truth to what I share on my newscast, for in reality there is not one among us whom I think can adequately claim to know what truth really is, other than that it might be the all that is, and some might even just describe it as love. But even still, by voicing that, does not necessarily guarantee that one fully understands the scope and magnitude of that which one is advocating as being all that is, or love, or the scope to which one is criticizing it. The wisest and most humble will flow with what is. Empowering others in their mastery of who they are within their own journey is one key to the puzzle, as opposed to seeking to have others as followers who blindly accept a path without having discerned whether or not that path truly feels right for that one person in that moment. Water flows. It has the power to build up and to destroy, but it adapts. The words of Bruce Lee come to mind. In an interview with Pierre Berton, a video on YouTube, Berton asked Lee if he remembered any of his profound wisdom from his movies. With incredible facial expression, he stated the following.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup. It becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
As long as there are criteria of fear, debt, and separation in the world, we ultimately exist within the dream that was created by the cabal. Is there perhaps another level to this dream? That is perhaps what humanity is about to discover. I might speculate, however, that the more of humanity that is open and willing to choose fearlessness, compassion, and love, the greater the chances will be of experiencing whatever we are to experience next as being a reflection and manifestation of that which we are collectively seeking to create and experience. You can remain in the cabal dream, or you can be water, my friend. Create a fantastic week until our next moment of now. So, that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is a part of the Enlight Universal group of programs. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary on the blog at cosmicvisionnews.com, on CVN's Facebook and Scene pages, CVN's YouTube channel, and also on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.